What we're going to look at today is we're going to begin with transitioning. Transitioning is a very complex journey in which so many veterans get lost because they haven't yet learned to orientate and map their compass through the territory. We're going to look at the experiences that you've had in your personal transition history, and if you can draw on that, what worked for you, what you stumbled against, and any strategies that you feel you can share. So the first thing we're going to do is just focus on transitioning. The map you've got in front of you will give you some idea if you need it, but the goal is for you to really draw on your own experiences and their own challenges and insights from your own time in transitioning, where it worked, where it didn't work. We want to bring out the core themes so that when people are watching the video, they feel the resonance and they also gain some of the wisdom of the experiences you've had.
Okay.
So Dan,
Yeah.
you first, mate.
All right. My transition was it was quite angry. I just literally landed from Afghanistan and had an interesting conversation with my career advisor, and pretty much told the military to go jam it, and I was getting out. So I pretty much just cut the cord without any forethought or anything like that. I just said, I'm done and I'm getting out. I was lucky because the doctor caught me. So the doctor caught me and called me in because she'd asked for my psych record and stopped me going naturally. So I ended up getting a medical discharge, and so my discharge time went from happening straight away to taking nearly 2 years. But I'd said to them that I didn't want to stay in the army. So I went and found my own career, and said, look, I'll transition and I'll do everything you want me to do and go and see a doctor and a psychiatrist and do all the claims process, but I'm not stepping one foot back on this military base.
Okay.
So
The things you point out are things like the anger, the moral injury.
yeah,
Those are the impacts that really erode, and I think a lot of people really struggle from. And as a result, just the loss of tribe that can come from that, and that's got its own associated problems.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Good points. JJ.
Yeah, transition out of the army. Well, let's face it, I discharged from the army in Afghanistan. That is not possible. But if you have a will, there's a way. I had so much anger and I was so broken and disgruntled that I managed to discharge from over there. Put my discharge app in, and when I stepped foot off that plane from one of my last trips, I said same thing as Dan. I'm not going back there, and because I blamed the army for a lot of my trauma, for a lot of my everything, and I was a very angry person back in the day, and because I joined when I was 17, and that's all I knew, and I loved the army. Army was all I wanted to do because of everything, and it's your family, and with my childhood upbringing, I just wanted to escape and go there, and so when I discharged, I hated it, and I ended up on our doorstep. I had to come home a week early from my long deployment, and I was pretty angry about that. But coming home to my wife, who was wanted a divorce, because I shouldn't have gone on my last trip. I went because my youngest brother was on it, and I wanted to be there for him. But my marriage was on the line. My marriage was on the rocks. Drinking heavily, fighting, angry. I was just an angry person, and so yeah, basically got home and said, well, you either turn left and I turn right. This is the conversation. I got off the airplane. I'm standing at my front door. My kids are still in the background. And I said, you go left, I go right, and we call it peace, and or we hop in, we turn right together, but not in separate cars, in the same car, and we sort this out because there was a lot of stuff going on, and thank God we did, And then when I also got out of the army, I took my med file to an advocate who I've come to realize was absolutely useless and massive. And he said, no, you got nothing wrong with you, mate. It was like there's my med records and you're telling me I'm okay. So I thought, oh, no worries. And then it was about 13 or 14 years that I was freelancing. I was doing my own business, and I was broken, getting pissed every night. Drugs, alcohol, whatever, just to get off this planet because I didn't want to be here, and yeah. Thank God I see on your on this here your piece of paper, something entered and helped me a particular day, and that's what saved my life.
So I think the thing, JJ, and I think most people do experience, is that sense of being broken. And that sense of being broken is, I mean, you've got the operational impacts, you've got the moral injuries, but when you get that emotion of anger and resentment that brews inside, and when we cut from the tribe, the challenge is then the loss of tribe, because the tribe is often the brothers around us. It's what happens around that and further up, where the moral injuries and the disillusionment comes in. So the core things that you really raised, and then the ripple into the relationship, and how many veterans have broken relationships as a result, where the wives and the children are the casualties of the war that comes home. So JJ, thanks. Those are critical components. Appreciate it. Frosty.
So I served 16 years and I really enjoyed my role in the military. But throughout that time, I sustained a lot of injuries throughout that. And a lot of them I'd keep to myself, and you kind of hide the injuries as they kind of gradually get worse. And then by 15, I was in a position where I couldn't physically work anymore. And that's where I went and saw the medical staff, and the surgeon had elected that I take a medical discharge. Had advised, that was his advice. So I went through that process, and in that itself, I felt a lot of guilt in that, like having an injury and not being able to continue my role in that environment. So that kind of starts the isolation, where I didn't want to be with the guys anymore. I didn't want to be part of that group anymore because I felt I wasn't able to perform in that. And then started on pharmaceutical interventions to numb the pain. And that medical model that I fell into happened to be a big part of my downfall. It was relying on pharmaceutical interventions and isolating myself further in that. And again, everything started to increase, and my activity started to decrease, and all my injuries started to increase. And that was probably the toughest part for me, was the isolation afterwards, and that loss of not only the people that I work with, but the loss of my family in that isolation as well. And I really felt that the model that I fell into was about medicating, compensating, and isolating, and that really wasn't beneficial for me.
Yeah, I like those three things. They're critical. And I mean, Frosty, I think, and I certainly resonate with a lot of that, is the one is, the guilt, not good enough because of the injuries. Throw in imposter syndrome onto that on top. Throw in the isolation and the impacts and the ripples around that. So we can see that even with the three of you, we're already beginning to understand that this process and the territory of navigating back into civilian life is extremely complex and layered. And it's not an easy one. People get lost on the way.
Barry, I use the analogy. I said it's like we're pigging dogs,
Yeah.
and then we come back and we have to go to a cat show and not hurt anyone. Don't hurt anyone.
Not allowed to bite a cat.
Don't bite a cat.
Yep.
That's a hard transition. You're like, okay, no worries.
And one of the things we'll get into in this conversation is how we find space and respect and compassion for the warrior part of ourselves, which is capable of many things, and the compassionate and loving part, and the tension between the two, and how they can coexist together.
Yeah.
Tim.
Yeah, so I was one of those soldiers that, if you looked at me on base, I wasn't a particularly, you could easily say that guy is not going to cut it. But in the field, that's when something jumped out of me, right? And after Afghanistan 2009, I loved the trip, and everyone could see what I could do in when it mattered. And I had brothers around me that had that faith. I'm like, yeah, this is a job for life. I want this for life. But I think there was a few things triggering me that I didn't know about, and I had a disagreement with my superior officer. I got transferred, and when I went to this new company, I'm not sure if what's the language rating here? Probably keep it PG,
I think
right?
PG.
Okay, well,
3-year-olds.
he said in no uncertain words, we've heard about you and we're going to make your life hell. And they were about to deploy to Afghanistan. And when I heard that, I'm like, I'm not scared to die, but I'm not going to die for people that don't care about me, right? And if I was to stay there, that would mean that I agree with their sense of my self-worth. And so I didn't know what the hell I was going to do next. Here I had, tribe around me that had my back. I had theirs. I had a job for life. And then I went to got transferred out of that into this new environment that didn't care. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I just knew if I was to stay there, that would mean I'd agree with their idea of who I was. And so I left, and if I was to put my body back 15 years, if someone says, "Oh, Tim, are you fine?" Yeah, I'm fine. Look, my hands and feet, they're all moving. I can see in front of me. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. You know, but like a lot of other guys, I wasn't sleeping. I had to drink half a carton of grog before I spoke to my then wife. When I call her my then wife, not my ex-wife, because I stand for a positive future. And I made the mistake of telling a doctor that I couldn't sleep, and I lost so many years of my life to pills. And when I started getting out of that space, I realized there's so many other people in that space as well, in the veteran space. So I found solace in breaking my isolation and helping others. Um, and I was doing a pretty good job of that, but I think I was using helping others as my own opiate. I was doing great work, but every 6 or 7 weeks, I'd have to write myself off drunk for 2 or 3 days, because I was still using something outside of me to find that balance. And yeah, that's kind of what was the first few years like for me.
Spot on, Tim. And I think what you bring out as well is that I think in every veteran I've sat with, including myself, the protector instinct and service to others is incredibly powerful. The problem is we need to turn it inwards into ourselves, and it's very difficult. I know certainly even at my age and many years after my war, trying to acknowledge emotion is very difficult, and we'll get to that one. So you raise a critical component in terms of the healing process. So spot on. Thanks. Ian.
Well, look, transition for me, in some ways, I think it was relatively easy because I was in a huge amount of pain. About from when I wake up in the day, anyway, it would range from 3 to 7 out of 10, which would mean that you couldn't talk, and my nervous system on my skin had a great deal of trouble wearing clothes. So you have to wear clothes when you're out, when you're not at home. It's not optional. And so it was always a great deal of pain, and I had faith when I got out that the system was there to look after me. And when I got out, I found that instead it laughed at me, and literally did laugh at me, and it really traumatized me. So much so that I had to write to the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition to influence them, because I said, if that's what happens to relatively senior people, what happens to people who are badly injured or can't write, and so on. But, I then focused on giving myself a purpose and recreating my own tribe in the form of a company. And over the next 15 years, we built 3 companies. But I did finally succumb, and I had to apply for a gold card, and then became TPI, and my family took over the business. So that all worked well. And in that time, I had divorced myself from the veteran community, from all my friends, all of them. And I then found myself back in the veteran community, and I found that it hadn't changed since 2002. People weren't being supported. People were still having suicidal ideation. And something inside of me said, you've got to devote yourself more than 100% to the veteran community. And I did about 60 to 70 hours a week volunteer work after ketamine infusions allowed me to function again and remove the pain, wear clothes. Always handy to wear clothes. And I think the end state of that dedication back to the community, and I did give it everything, was I had a car accident just before Christmas, and had a micro sleep, went off the road, and I was within 2 or 3 meters of hitting a 5-foot deep ditch, and I drove past it, thankfully. I didn't know it was there until after I came back, but that really made me wake up, and finally I had a recent discussion with a couple of senior politicians, and that just made me sit back and say, right, it's my time. I've done my bit over the past 5 years. I can hand over to somebody else. So that transitions over a 20-odd year period, 25-year period, but it was really, really quite. I gave myself a purpose after I realised that things weren't there.
And I think what for me, your living testament and presence is about the fact that we don't just get it lost on the transitioning process, we get lost within the system.
Yes.
And it's the point at which the system, I always say, is who's part of the solution, who's part of the problem. And when the system becomes a part of the problem, then the tribe, as it extends out, becomes a part of the issue. I think you point to the fact that part of healing, I think, is finding a mission, refinding a mission.
Yeah.
As well as numbers of you have indicated, it's refinding tribe in a different form. I think you also point to the fact that in your own healing, and certainly knowing some of you guys, the fact that we know a lot more today about the brain and body connection and the modalities and approaches to connecting and healing our bodies and our minds and our souls in ways which extend beyond current approaches, I think is affording veterans and current serving people an opportunity to heal a lot more effectively as well. But thanks for that.
I might just chime in there because our superpower when we're in service is trust of the guy next to us, right?
Yeah.
And then when we get out, we think, oh, this medical system, that's there to help us. We can trust them. And then to have that trust betrayed, it just kind of takes you out at the knees. You don't know, well, if I can't trust anybody, then I'm the only one who's got my back. I can't drop my guard for a second because something bad's going to happen. And so to have that betrayal of trust that you've done the right thing and you expect the right thing to happen, that's a pretty hard thing to come back from.
Spot on. And Tim, I think betrayal of trust is probably one of the most profound injuries that people experience, and that leaves people sitting alone in desperate situations, as a mate of mine said, with a pistol in his mouth. And when trust is betrayed, it's very difficult to regain that trust. Yeah. And we know that, my biggest mission now is against the issue of aloneness as well. So, yeah, good point, my friend. Yeah, Bob.
I started my transition just as I joined the Air Force, I think, in some ways. I ran to the Air Force from a business that was taken over in a hostile takeover, my personal business. I didn't intend to stay long. I ended up staying 36 years, but that's a different part of the story. But only 5 years in, I was involved in some issues and ended up being identified as PTSD in 1990. So I served most of my career with PTSD, mostly hidden and mostly internalized because there was no way to really manage it in the system at the time. And then around 2010, I was involved in some issues in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I had some exposures there, which didn't help. And then in 2010, I was in an accident at sea. Navy had a good attempt at trying to drown me and kill me. And I was quite injured in that, which had caused me pain, very similar to Ian. I pretty much have pain all the time in my back and knee from that accident. And then in 2015, I had a stroke. During all that period, I was thinking about the fact that one day I would be out of the Air Force. My father was Air Force and he'd left and he walked away completely. And that's, was an interesting thing to see. And I presumed that I would just slowly drift out of the Air Force and life would go on. And then, of course, hit this stroke and I'm lying in a hospital bed and I'm having lawyers coming to talk to me because there was investigations, things going on about something that I was peripheral to. And I started to get angry, and I've had angry since 1990. And so I made the decision then and there, right, this is I'm out. And I was about to go into a very senior command at that point. But in terms of transition, I'd already thought about transition quite a lot, and that I knew I'd miss status, and I knew I'd miss power, and I knew I'd miss belonging. I thought I was confident, but not confident, just knew that would be a case. And so I prepared for that when I left. And I tried the reserve as a weaning strategy. That was personally a mistake for me. I should have gone with my gut instinct, which was to just go. And I hung around the reserve. And by the end of the third year, I was lucky to do a day a week. And the chief saying, "What are you doing?" I'm going, "I don't know. I'm out of here." And so I pulled the pin there. And I knew that for me to be successfully transitioned, I would have to completely not be associated, not be in something that was similar to what I did. So I started a whole new thing. I started music, became a musician, and everyone sort of, my old colleagues are like, "What the hell?" But when I moved to where I retired, they only knew me as Bob the Muso, and I loved that because I wasn't recognised or measured through my military career. And it was only after several years that I got to trust some of them and they got to know me, that I showed up at an Anzac Day in my uniform and the whole place nearly went ballistic because they had no idea. So, um, and transition early was harder. I was frustrated. I've been working for 36 years with a team that had one unified goal, which was to provide protection for our country. We had a sense of obligation and duty. And suddenly these people in Civvy Street didn't operate to that set of rules. It wasn't about communality. It was about individuality. They were all loquacious. They spoke. They took so long to say anything sensible or useful. And then I got the reputation of being that typical military guy who's clipped short and sharp because that's how we were, brevity, etc.
And you turned up on time.
And I turned up on time every time, and it drove me mad when I didn't. And it was simple things that made me realise how much that the institutionalisation is real, but how important that structure is to give us a presence that you can carry into your post-military life. But I would also re-emphasise something that others have said. Alcohol is also a part of the equation, because in my periods when I am letting anger and discomfort go, there's usually a correlation with the alcohol usage as well. And it's only in the last few years, as I'm now starting to fight with the old organisation I work for recognition for injuries, that I'm feeling some of the things that Ian was talking about as well. And then I start looking at veterans who are junior, who don't have a voice, and I was quite senior, so I had a voice, and I think if I'm struggling with the kind of voice that I have and can use, and junior people aren't, then there's something broken and really rotten here. But transition-wise, I think it did work out okay for me. But I threw the energy I used to use in the military into music, much to my wife's chagrin.
The secret, I think, is that it's not about leaving oneself behind, but it's about using the skill sets
And
that we embody and applying them to the new territory. I, in many ways, say that I call the transition into civilian territory as the next operational front. And the SOPs have got to change.
Yeah.
It's not for them to adjust to us, although I do believe that they need to be a little bit more compassionate and understanding, and also be a mutual participation and engagement in receiving veterans back.
You've got to keep your own personal ROE high.
Yeah, very much. I think, look, critical things have been raised here. I mean, I know that I left my war. I was a fighting medic in the Bush War. We worked on the Mozambique border. We didn't even realize that we'd been at war. I left the war, and when I look ahead, it was like 5 immigrations, huge collapses along the way. But we had no knowledge because it was the Vietnam time. We didn't have an understanding. I arrived at university, waking up 30 times a night. I found my healing not through alcohol, but I found it through running. And like alcohol, it's just as bad because my 5Ks eventually turned into ultra marathons. And I was running away from. The wolves were just tracking me all the time. I've also realized, which a number of you guys track as well, is anger. And the thing I've realized is when I scraped away my anger, and it's there, I mean, we live with it, but it's who's living with who. But when we scrape away anger, what we have is grief. And the thing I've realized most of all is probably what connects all of us is the grief that lies in the middle of our hearts. In Africa, they have this term called Ubuntu, which is I am truly who I am in the presence of who we all are. And all of us lived in tribe. And in tribe, we had a sense of dignity, identity, purpose, and mission. How we recreate that is the biggest challenge. We are tribe animals. It's a different thing in civilian street. We live by tribe. We breathe tribe. It's the most natural extension of who we are. How we formulate that in the transitioning process is critical. So just in terms of the first part, thanks for your contribution. Do we have 5 minutes? Yep. If one thing that made a big difference, short and sharp, in your transitioning process?
Community.
Community?
geez, finding my purpose.
Finding purpose for us to.
For me, it was other veterans that had been through the fire and found their way out was the way that I got out.
So the return to the brotherhood, critical. We don't have to leave tribe behind. It's a part of our healing. Don't.
Absolute breakdown.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have asked, is there a better way, unless I absolutely broke down, because I'm the toughest guy I know. And I had to absolutely break down before I asked that question.
Yep. Like you, I learned through the fires. I'm a psychologist, but I'm probably my worst enemy.
Well, and there was a question in that. I'm like, well, how many other people are in this space right now?
Correct.
And then when I asked that question, I literally saw them left and right of me. And then that became my tribe. All these people I probably haven't even met yet, willing me on. That was that breakdown, and then that question, and these people.
Yeah. Our tribe on the periphery. Yeah, spot on. Ian?
I think the word I'd use would be drive. I had to drive myself through so much pain to give myself a purpose and recreate that comfortable environment for myself and my family.
Spot on.
I don't think I've ever got there, but I'm a lot closer than I was in 2002.
Everything is a work in progress till we breathe our last breath. We never fully arrive. Yeah, that's the bad news, boys.
Sure.
Bob?
Purpose, but through community.
So, that everything you described today was the reason I called my book, Which Way is Your Warrior Facing? Because the warrior attributes should never be left behind or demeaned or diminished. They're the fire that drives us into change. Thanks, boys. I guess I thought what we'd start off with today was really just starting to map out transitioning, both in regards to your personal experiences and Ted and Alex. Given that you've worked with veterans for quite an extended period of time, it's what has your experiences been of the struggles they have, and in your experience, what has worked in the transition territory? It's quite a lot, so it's more around distilling some key points that we'll then explore further as we move through the program. I thought, Alex, let's start off with you. I'd be love to hear about what your experiences have been sitting with veterans over so long.
Thanks very much, Barry. And so let's start with strengths, because this is a proud institution filled with lots of training, lots of investments in humans who've gone through some really difficult scenarios, both throughout everyday life, turning up to work every day, having signed the dotted line. Transitioning out of that environment into civ environment, for a lot of people, is good. And they transition really well with great supports into employment spaces and family again, and much more time for self and others. That's wonderful. The data is pretty clear about that having given military service, having served and done that dotted line and turned up for years and years and years, sometimes decades of service, that transition space is good into really fulfillment of life in the next chapter. So where we are now is, I don't see those people. I see the ones who falter, where they feel forgotten and they feel unaware where to go next. Those are the people I see. And I see the tipping end of those ones where they've really faltered and they feel at fault for having faltered, because that's the sense of responsibility that they carry. So the folks that I see have the guilt, the shame, the worry, and they don't know where to park it, and they don't know who to park it with, or to ask the question, where do I go from here? And when that happens, the distress in that human is very much internalized, and it leaches out in all kinds of directions. And people around feel it, especially people who are loved ones and who are caring for them. So in lots of different ways, we have a disruption of the biopsychosocial spiritual mandate that everyone comes into life with and leaves life with. And when we have that mandate and that disruption, the engagement piece is super critical. And of course, I do this, my family does this, members of the ADF do this. They ask the question, hey, bestie, I trust you. I've got this problem. Who do I go? And almost always it's someone they trust that you'll rely on to go access. So the difficulty is acculturated access, actual access, systems understanding all of those complexities, timely access into people who get it, who know what to do, and who can deliver some of that formal caring. and then engagement with the entire system. So when I have someone coming in, they represent themselves, but they represent their spouses, their family units, expectations and aspirations of what to do now. And then all of the medical stuff. And the medical stuff is boring because we exhaust the standard medical stuff pretty quickly. But let's cast a bigger picture. All of that complexity means explanation to set expectations management and a common language to say, hey, we're going to start today here. How do I get to the next point where you come back? How do we achieve that? And in order to achieve that, I have to close my books, put my pen away, and ask the other question, hey, why are you here? And what can I do to help? And if we start with that curiosity and openness, maybe that's beginning step.
We could keep you going the whole afternoon. They're absolute gems of wisdom. I mean, every word had a lot of power in it. And I think that sense of being curious of the person you're sitting opposite. And I think the sense that people are lost. And when people are lost, we need to embrace them with compassion and care, rather than assessment and modality. The first is the natural human relationships of walking with and finding one's way out of the darkness. So, Alex, thank you. And I love that as a psychiatrist, you embody these core values. They're extremely precious. And for many out there, not just within your profession, a little bit shortchanged on the ground. So it's good to see. Thank you. All right, Ted.
G'day, Barry. I think, I've kind of landed in the veteran space over the last 20, 25 years via a sort of somewhat circuitous route. I was lucky enough to be a medical student within the Concord repat system when it was still a repat system. And then I've kind of had significant numbers of veteran patients throughout my career and over the last kind of 5 or 6 years with a strong association with Pro Patria. But what that's meant is that I've seen veterans from World War I veterans, World War II, Vietnam veterans, and then as we kind of moved into the 2000s, started to see the sort of war on terror and the impacts that was happening and starting to see a lot younger veterans, which for me was a real learning experience over that 5 years. I guess, I particularly for someone who hasn't served himself, I approach this with a good deal of humility. I think in some ways I'm very keen to stay on the lane that I feel I have expertise, which is in the area of next step treatments, which I can talk about. But on the other issues, it is much more a kind of level communication. And what I've noticed, one of the great pleasures of working with veteran patients and in my broader network, sort of veteran friends, is that this is not a group that is inherently broken. People go into military service that are above average resilience. Every service selects people that are a bit tougher than usual, that have a few more resources than usual. And so that's a great starting point. And that to me gives me a lot of hope. If you left this group of people that end up in the military just without any of the trauma or without any of the kind of experiences, they'd probably do a lot better than average in general. They tend to rise to the top because the qualities that veterans have and that are selected for are good qualities to have in terms of functioning in society. So when I see people, I'm very conscious that, they're coming to me with a problem that's had. And it may well be a result of experiences, or, kind of obviously kind of traumatic wartime experiences, but it may just be the kind of personality, the institutions and how you interact with that. And almost everyone that I see has had some contact with the mental health system up to that point, and it's invariably involved, medications or psychology, and they've had a range of good or bad experiences. But by the time they see me, what's been out there hasn't really worked that well. So one of the sort of, things that really, and this isn't really even a veteran problem. So I think, there's stuff that about good treatment which goes beyond just, veterans. As I said, just stepping back, just reiterating, I think if you get veterans well, they do a lot better than general population when you get them well, because I think you started off with a group of people that were above average. I think that's the starting point. So that gives me a lot of motivation to try and do things well. And the big gap, I think, that I see is the experience that most people have with the mental health system is very narrow. It's a bunch of medications and a range of kind of psychology experiences, some of which may not necessarily be the highest quality. They may just be kind of very kind of generic talk therapy. So they've come often with years of being unwell, but when you drill down to it, they really haven't tried a lot of different things. And the sort of the insight that I have about the treatments that we deliver now, whatever it is, whether it's psychology, the SSRIs, TMS, ketamine, psychedelics, IV ketamine, all of these treatments are 6 out of 10 treatments, in my view. From an efficacy point of view, they all have fairly kind of similar efficacies. So they don't work for everyone.
Yeah.
But the great thing about moving between a whole range of modalities or having access to a whole range of modalities is that the 4 out of 10 that it don't work for is different for every one of those modalities. So just because drugs didn't work for you, doesn't mean that one of these other things can't work for you. And if even 2 or 3 of these things don't work for you, it doesn't necessarily mean the 4th. Whereas in the old days, what would happen is people would just try one drug after another. They might have, and there's 20 or 30 SSRIs, SNRIs, which are all not that different to each other. So, it probably isn't surprising that some of those people don't respond.
Ted, we're going to have to
Yep.
I want to take out the core themes that you mentioned. And I think for both of you, what I want to say is the respect I have for 2 professionals who embody humility, that work shoulder to shoulder with the people they sit with, and that have the flexibility of a toolkit. And the fact that you see them as human beings rather than a disorder needing a diagnosis and a treatment. And I want to say, as the veteran and the human coder myself, much respect and thank you. I think those are the lessons that need to be spread out there. So thanks to you both. Frosty.
I think something to consider is a term that used to get thrown around a lot, and it doesn't anymore, but contemporary veteran. And why I think that's important is we're often referred to as veterans from World War II and Vietnam. And a lot of people look back on that and wonder why we're having problems today that might be different to the problems that we had back then. Since 99, our ADF has rapidly evolved through capability of human performance and operational capability. We've now been involved with more conflicts around the world than we ever have been before. And the tempo in that is a wartime tempo. So the guys who are joining, or guys and girls who are joining back then, are stepping into a wartime environment where they're continuously training and acting as if they're going to war. So we're seeing a lot more complex cases of people getting out. And the old modalities where we have one modality of treatment doesn't seem to be working. For myself personally, it was a number of treatments that I received that created platforms for me to stand on to then do that next treatment. And some of them were medicine-based, some of them were human-based with EMDR, some of them were nutrition-based with the right types of foods, some of them were practice-based with like breath work and meditation, and others were social-based, so connecting, like we said, with tribe and with other groups. So I think it's important not just look at this from a clinical perspective, but transitioning is a bunch of things. Family included in that as well is so important to include them in those conversations and that experience. If you're separating yourself from the family through that journey, you're not growing with the family, you're growing isolated to that. So I think combining all these things as a wraparound are just good for veterans, but I think for health in general, that's really important.
Well, the layers now, Frosty, aren't they? They're layers. It's complex. And as a result, one tool will not fit all. And so people need to hear that voice that the 3 of you do raise, because that's the voice that will create the change to facilitate even more healing. So thank you. Kate, good to have you here.
Thank you. So I haven't actually fully transitioned myself. I'm in my 25th year of service. So 10 years full-time and since then part-time. So I have a foot in both doors, and I've helped hundreds of veterans with their transition process. And what I'm seeing, what I'm observing is this, people just need to find themselves again, and to find yourself again, I get people back to their bodies. So that might be through connection to their breath, connection to movement, connection with other aligned, like-minded people. Sometimes it's just stripping away all the things that they think they need to do in their external environment and just bringing them back to, you can actually ask yourself the questions you've been asking everyone externally. You can actually ask yourself that, because every answer that you do need is actually within you. And I know that when people are deep in the hole, that is very difficult to access. But I think with the right continuity of care around them and for them to know there is no cookie cutter approach, which has been mentioned here just beautifully. Uh, get curious and try all the things. Try the breath work. It may not be for you. Try the meditation. And as you evolve and as they heal, they might revisit some of these things that didn't necessarily work for them in the start, that now they're like, oh wow, that's really amazing. I can do that now, and have that sense of achievement. So yeah, their purpose is themselves really, and to study themselves once they get out. And I think that's missing, is all this external focus where it needs to come back here.
Yeah, so I think where you're spot on is that the mission is back to ourselves. And the territory of that mission is within the body that we operate in. And I know that the work you do within the bodies is so powerful. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of this as we progress through the next couple of conversations. So thanks, guys. Absolute pleasure. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, Barry. Yeah, I suppose I've transitioned twice. Firstly, lost the tribe from leaving the Royal Navy, and then secondly, leaving the Australian Defence Force. So both very different cultures. And I think when you change a culture, a tribe, a culture, you take with you very powerful skills that you developed in one tribe, and when you arrive in another, they may not be so welcomed. So I've had many occasions, I think through my transitions where I've faced, a challenge with using, a skill that I've learned, and I've stopped using it, or I found a protective measure to avoid that. And slowly but surely, you take away your skills, you de-skill yourself through fear of, a repercussion. And I think that to me was the start of, the breakdown in resilience. Losing me. So I think it taught me to respect my values and me rather than my environment. Sometimes changing your environment is the key. And I think that's where I started my transition journey, was when I left all of those environments where those skills would have been, used. I needed to create space to transition. And that's probably when my transition started quite a few years after I left the military.
Thanks, Ben. I mean, that's a really, you painted out beautifully. And I mean, I think the challenge is that the tools you need are already within you, but they demand adaptation and adjustment. We can't be talking about 0700 in our board meetings. The language we use. We were talking earlier on about the impatience of things always need to be timed, and how we manage that when things are late or delayed. And the expectations we have when people fail us. So there's certainly an adjustment. But what I can say is everything you need is already within you. It's just how we learn to use it in a way that works. So thank you for raising that. I appreciate it. Kieran.
Harry,
Kieran.
how are you, mate?
Good, mate.
Transition, a lot to cram in a very short moment. But if you can imagine, you in your 14th year of serving, you've been awarded, you've got a good reputation. And so over time and training and different KPIs and a cultural relation, you get to be known as someone that's done well. And within a matter of minutes, the military police come in, they stand you up, they pat you down in front of your peers, and they say, get out. So it took 13 to 14 years to become someone or something. Within an hour or two, it's pulled away. That was my transitions. And so I was wrongly accused of something which I won't go into. However, what I'm talking about, the principles of transition here. For me, two things really help. One, a good mentor who endowed sort of philosophical practices. And then the second, I've come on to study psychology and neuroscience as my background. And for me, neuroscience. So I looked at the neuroscience lens was, if you withdraw from any drug, the brain is going to respond with discomfort. And my drug were my people and my tribe. And now I'd been pulled away in a couple of hours. So I was able to forgive myself to go, you're going to feel uncomfortable because the brain is not sure about these new patterns. And it's been accused of something which you believe as a self is not capable of even doing. So that was another issue. Long story short, the mentor saw me feeling sorry for myself one day, and he reached out in the most beautiful way I've ever experienced in my adult and child life. And he put his hand on my cheek and he said, "Hello, my boy." And I had never seen or felt such love from a human being before. And then he withdrew his hand, he looked perplexed, and he said, "You're a soldier, aren't you?" And I, in a very mopey sort of way, was, "Yes." He said, "Well, you're not much of one." He said, "You got to stand up, my boy, and fight." And I went, "Holy shit." I similar to your writings, Barry, compromised who I said I was. So practicing this physical version of soldiering, but now it was a philosophical version, that was the motivator for me to live up to what I say I am. Again, falling back on the science of conditioning in the brain meant there's a lot of work, time, effort, repetition involved now. So you've got work to do. So I think finding, with luck sometimes, things were able to complement each other and to keep pushing through. But transition can be quick and happen and wrench you out of your safe space, I suppose. And then some can plan it. But like Kate said, having a foot outside with a group of blokes I surf with as well, I think was really helpful. They became my tribe. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Kieran. I mean, I think what you really raise is yours is an interesting transition, because transition is complex enough, but as Alex said, it can be made extremely well, and that there are those that do struggle. I think yours had the added bite of the moral injury at its most profound. And when we do that, it's very difficult to do the other complexities of transitioning if they are present. The moral injury, especially when there's profound shame involved, is a haunting one that erodes us deeply from the inside. And that is something we'll come to in the conversations, and that you really, and I think that's critical, because we know that the moral injury stuff is, it's happening. And its impact on people is almost more profound than operations. So, well, thanks, guys. That was a good beginning dive into transitioning, and we're going to deepen some of it as we go along. So thank you for your contributions. Okay, great to have everybody here today. Today we're going to begin the conversation just focusing on transitioning at a fairly superficial level. It's an opportunity for those of you that have been in transitioning to think about what were the challenges that faced you, the strengths you brought in, where things got stuck, but whatever comes to mind that's relevant. For those of you that have worked with the veteran and first responder population, it will be the themes that have come up and what were the core issues you feel are worth raising about your observations as you sat with people that talked about their transitioning. For those that work with veterans, psychologists, it can be a mix of both. But again, we've got the constraints. We'd like to try and fit it into about 5 minutes. All right, so Frosty, let's start off with you, my friend.
So I guess I had a pretty challenging transition. I had what I kind of define as a pretty enjoyable military career. I got a lot out of that, but I sustained a lot of injuries throughout my career.
Yeah.
And because my body wasn't able to kind of function as it was earlier in my career, I was then kind of pushed into a medical discharge. And that led me into the medical system, which led me pretty much onto polypharmacy. So it seemed to be, back when my transition was there, every medical professional that I went to, every time that I had a problem, there was a pharmaceutical solution for that. And that ended up giving me a bag of meds that I was consuming. And they worked less and less. I became highly addicted to them, and it really reduced my functionality. It put a burden on my family. My wife then had to become my full-time carer, which put a huge amount of strain on her. And it wasn't until I started looking at more unconventional treatments that they were doing overseas and that were just kind of emerging in Australia, and then stepping into things and understanding how to utilize things like medicinal cannabis, how to use meditation, how to eat good foods that helped me stay in ketosis. It really started to bring me back to some sort of functionality. And then again, having brain scans that showed traumatic brain injuries was a big kind of catalyst for me to start receiving other more advanced treatments like ketamine infusion. And then since then, I've slowly built those layers back up. So I think the challenge for transition for me was kind of following the bouncing ball, thinking I was doing it all right, but that led me deeper down the rabbit hole, where it wasn't until I started to speak to other veterans and other people that were looking outside the box that I started to step back out again and actually transition into that civilian environment more comfortably.
Yeah, thanks, Rosin. I mean, that really points to the fact that your journey wasn't just specific to you. It's about the responsibility to start to layer in more holistic aspects of healing. And I think the dark rabbit hole that you do talk about, specifically with the medical discharges and then the poly sort of pharmacy approach to management, has its benefit, but it also certainly has its dark holes that people go into. So I think what you're raising is pretty critical, and be interesting to see that theme and how it works through as we move around. So thanks, Wade.
My transition, 2 words, I'm fine. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Stop asking me. You know, my hands and feet are working, I'm working hard. What else more do you want? But I couldn't ignore that family was falling apart and I had to drink half a carton of grog before I spoke to my then wife. I call her my then wife, not my ex-wife. And I made the mistake of telling a doctor that I couldn't sleep. And like a lot of veterans, I had a pharmaceutical company going, great, he doesn't know any better and he's vulnerable. And so I lost 6 years of my life to pills. And when I started coming out of the fog, I realized there's a lot of other veterans in particular in this same space. And I found a lot of benefit in helping others. It's funny. You can see what others need and you're more willing to take action for others than you're often stepping over your own needs sometimes. So I found that, you know, the help I gave others, it was almost like it was hitting me as well. And nobody told me. I mean, they're very quick to throw pills at you, but no one tells you the cost of taking these pills. It's like a short-term loan. They give you $100 to get by because you're broke, but then you got to pay back $200 the next day, so you need to get another loan. And nobody tells you how hard it is to come off these things. And I can really understand when people take pills or given pills because they're hurting, and then when you start getting off of them, you've got like a doubling down of, you know, pain and discomfort. So the programs, you know, I helped develop was to, you know, break the isolation people are feeling and then getting them out of fatigue. Because I noticed if we could do those 2 things, break the isolation, get them out of fatigue, have them sleep better naturally, then it's like their own inner compass started switching on. So I'm actually grateful for, you know, the crap I went through. You know, that's actually supposed to be there to be turned into fertilizer and then help other people get through what they get through and help them, you know, flourish.
And so, Tim, when you started using the other modalities, and I like that term, the fog, you know, we talk about the fog of war, but we can also talk about the fog of medication. Did you find that your need for medication became a lot less? That in fact your healing was at a more deeper level, a lasting level?
Well, I still had needs that had to be met, but no one told me that my own body could meet those needs. You know, simple things like breath work can improve sleep. No one told me that. No one's making money from it. and you know, forget about talking to people that just talk about like psychologists and stuff, because no one tells them that the trauma goes down deeper than the words can reach. So they're trying to help, and I can see they're well intentioned, but they're just unfortunately, I mean, the smart ones use the, you know, somatically integrated stuff, but there just comes this point where you end up blaming yourself. It's all my fault, you know.
It's a tough one. And I think the core thing I always appreciate is that concept you use is that the trauma goes deeper than the words can reach, which means that maybe trauma goes even deeper than the pharmacology can reach. There's always limits. And it's not that they don't have a use, but when we step forward from that place where it stops, that I would imagine is where these more innovative remedies go and where faith is also a critical component. So thank you for that. Beck, good to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for my journey, and it's also interesting to hear because it's so different to these guys. And what I found is I could look at those around me and see what had occurred and how things played out for them. So I was able to have awareness and go, I don't want to end up there. So I made sure that I drove my transition as best as I could on my terms, knowing that my body was telling me, and it started getting louder and louder. And then I went, okay, this is what I need to do. So I essentially took it into my own hands and made sure I lined up the ducks as best as I could to get what I needed to support my health, because that was the priority. And fortunately, I didn't have to go down the polypharmacy route. I went, I don't think that's what I need. I mean, I took some meds for a short period of time, but that just gave me like a little bit of a settle to go, okay, this is what's going on. And I was able to then go and find those different modalities to help with what I needed, with breath work, meditation, yoga, like exercise, whatever it was. And I look at it with the ways that, military people talk in capability, like everyone is a capability, and each capability has different bricks that make them work. And when those are taken away, we have to find those ones to build us back up, and they look different for everybody. So I was also then having people who had been through the process prior to me supporting me through, because you don't get told a lot of information, so you have to find out things. And now I feel that really was beneficial, but I also can give back. And so I'm helping others currently going through those where I can, just, giving different perspectives on where they're at. Oh, this is all too hard and everything's over. But when you realize that, it just looks different and there are good things to come, but also figuring out how you find what is going to help you, and staying connected is really important. So I'm really grateful that my transition wasn't as maybe hectic as some people, and I really am acknowledging that, and the spiritual stuff has come in significantly for me where
Yeah.
it wasn't really there, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, Beck, I think what you bring is that the mission, I guess, of all the conversations we're having is that there really is a need to have a more visible, kind of informed, multi-layered process that is both innovative and respectful to the many parts of people struggling to transition. And when people are informed about that, when they do begin the journey, they are informed and they know what they need to ask for and are more empowered in it. And I often think it's about taking the veteran from the back seat where that vulnerability keeps him locked in a sense of helplessness, putting them back in the front seat with all the right information so they can make informed choices. So I think you bring something important. Yeah, thanks. Ian.
Can I just highlight something
go for
for you? And again, it might not work into this, but it's just making me think as well. What I witness around me with the veterans that are transitioning from complex spaces into this new environment, the ones that are doing it successfully are doing modalities that aren't usually available through the system. People are using medicinal cannabis, people are using methylene blue, people are using psychedelics in large doses and small doses for microdosing. And we're doing this in our communities without the support of a higher authority to help us do that. And everyone's got to keep silent about it. So we've got this big missing gap of, hey, we're doing breath work, we're doing yoga because we could talk about those things, but we're not talking about how we're creating the connections in our brains, in our bodies to be able to let us do these modalities. When I was earlier on in my transition, I had a psychologist telling me, practice meditation, or even like Tim was saying, practice breath work. I was like, I can't, like it's just not physically possible. It wasn't until I had extra things in me that were more naturally or plant-based that I was able to then sit there and reflect on myself and actually look internally to make those better decisions. And I think it's something that doesn't get covered because everyone doesn't want to talk about what they're actually doing to cope.
Well, there's the challenge, isn't it?
Because those things remove the blockages. All the pharmaceuticals do is deal with the problems that blockages cause. That's been my experience of what Frosty just said.
Yeah.
So, the question I always ask myself personally was, in anything I'm doing, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? And if it's a part of the problem and we reflect honestly back on ourselves, then we need to have the courage to be able to look at things at a broader view. And I'm hoping what we do in the course of all these conversations is create a broader map for change to happen. And you're raising good points. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, my journey, I just had to think about this because the only thing I can recall about my transition was the word pain, or in fact, extreme pain, because I had ingested a parasite when I was in the multinational force and observers in the Sinai, probably by having a shower and not closing my mouth and getting it in that way. And what that caused was extreme pain from my rear end to my hair. The hair that can't feel pain, mine did, and uh, it was so much pain that I when I was medevac back to Australia and in temporary accommodation, I would come home at the end of the day after trying to think about getting jobs and things like that, and being the breadwinner. Uh, and I would do like John Cleese's funny walk, stomp around the house, because I was so frustrated that I'd just destroyed my career, and people were telling me, "You're going to be TPI for the rest of your life," and I could not accept that. So for me, then, if I separate that issue as much as I can, underneath, I still went through the psychological stresses of transition with my family, because it's your family that are there. You know, I was a leader. I planned, I acted decisively every time. And in the military, that's quite common. Your colleagues, your tribe around you, they're used to you doing that, and your family see you doing that, but they're actually not part of it. But suddenly, when you're out and you have to plan, do, act, lead, they're actually the people that are the receiving what you're doing, and you're essentially giving them orders, and they don't react too well to that. And so, really, to me, I had to think about that, and I had to adapt to that physical agony, adapt to the family situation around me, and be honest with myself that I actually had to stop thinking about being the main breadwinner. My wife and I discussed it. She actually led that discussion, and she decided that she would go back to work and be the breadwinner while I tried to establish a business from home. And that's where I thought that I'd see out the rest of my days, wearing tracky dacks and Ugg boots in the winter and shorts and have you. Because to me, it was so painful I could barely wear clothes. Don't imagine it, but it was the way it was. So we had to find our way forward, and I think there are plenty of people that get out with that type of agony that we don't often think about. I mean, as a veteran leader for the last 5 years, I've helped so many people from example, may well have had a fungus growing in their brain and moving down through their body, the pain they were in, and what people didn't recognize. And I think the takeaways for me were, for anyone might be listening, is that involve your whole family. Communicate. Don't try to take the lead all the
Yes,
time.
spot on, yeah.
And that military leadership skills that you develop, all of us, no matter what position we held, put yourself in the back a little bit and let the team lead, and recognize that the drive and determination that you had is you've got to help the whole family have that drive and determination, and and to be flexible to get through it.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point in that so often, and we know, the veteran brings the war back home, and the family become the enemy. And I think because the brain and the body are under so much trauma or confusion, combined with shifting the brain, which it doesn't do automatically, from a war operational impact to a civilian life, it's extremely difficult. And if I go back here, when we start to work with veterans in ways which free the deeper things in their bodies, we give them a better chance to come back home and be fully present.
Yeah.
And the two need to go together. And often the change, we can't just tell people about, your family are not the enemy. Well, the wiring in the brain doesn't necessarily do that. And the wiring we can't talk ourselves out of, but when we work with stuff that helps the wiring to shift, then we're ready to create the change we need. Yeah. So thank you for that. Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm Michelle. I'm an ex-army and now a veteran. I actually enjoyed the army experience. I do have an injury now though, and it's I've seen 4 medics and they have 4 different reasons about why it happened and how to fix it, but there's never a real solution. I just got to deal with the pain that comes backwards and forwards again. And sometimes I can't even walk properly. And well, actually, I can't walk properly a lot of the time, but there are some days where I almost can't walk. So like I said, I enjoyed my army experience. I entered just after high school. I had really bad ADHD and I didn't realize. And it wasn't until the age of 36, after I did my undergrad in psych, that I actually got diagnosed. And man, that medication absolutely changed my life. But I'm thankful for the disorder because that's why I joined the military. And I learned a lot, just basic organization skills. I learned to regulate myself. I learned that I am actually good at something. And it gave me the foundation to actually achieve when I thought I never would be able to. And so I always go back to that. I went into the military as well because I love my country and I wanted to look after my country. And I loved being with my peers and having a relationship with them and feeling like I belong somewhere. Because for a while when I was really young, I didn't feel like I belonged because I just struggled so much. So that's my journey in and out of the military. But now I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with veterans and I have for a really long time. The main and first responders, the main themes that I see is that we're afraid to get help, partially because I don't know about you guys, but I felt quite ashamed. And I also learned really quickly not to seek support from the psych team. So I'm really thankful for Padres, for sure. But now I feel like the biggest thing is that veterans, we really need to feel safe and that we can trust the people around us. And I've seen plenty of reasons why we shouldn't, unfortunately. And so, because of that, I really like to get to know people really well before I even kind of do anything like formal, I suppose you could say. But when I do get to know people, there is a little bit of like what we call cognitive restructuring, which is helping people to see that there is a way forward and getting out of that stuckness where they feel trapped. So having a relationship is so important. And sometimes it can take 6 months, 2 years, even to feel like I know them and they know me. And once we really, really understand what they need, then we move forward slowly. I believe that, and I've always believed that the solution and the way forward already lives inside of you as well. And the job of a psych, I think, is just to be there with you and watch you find those resources that are in there, even though they're super, super deep sometimes. And that's why you've got to know the person and for them to know themselves. And then when that happens, it's like they build a trust in themselves. It's like, no, you've been with me for like 2 years. I know that you know me. And because of that, I feel safe to be able to keep trying what I'm doing. And I often just reflect with them. I'm like, hey, bloody hell, you did a good job. And it's true. I never lie. It's like if I say anything, you know that I'm telling you the truth. And it's exciting. Beck, you kind of highlighted a few things in that it does take a while to get to know what you need. And I can see that you pushed really hard and you tried and you looked at all sorts of different ways to move forward, and it's helped a lot. It's scary to take control yourself because I feel like I'm so used to myself and others taking orders from other people, but you need to really trust yourself and actually tell them what you need because you do know a lot. And so, I don't know, just believe in yourself and get others around you to support you as you go on the journey together. And it's probably going to take longer than what you want. Hey, It will. But just keep going, because if you practice the person that you want to be, you will be that person. Yeah.
Look, there's gold I mean, I could spend hours just unpacking that one. But I think the core truth there is that when we start to take the attitude that everything that a veteran needs to know to heal is already within him.
Yep.
And there's another approach which says, which I think every person should have on their wall that works with veterans, is that the minute you think you know what somebody needs, you've made your first mistake. And if we learn to listen before we diagnose and treat and label and form relationships, as you describe it, healing begins. The primary thing is connection. And I think the way you started off was by saying a lot of people don't want to get help because they've lost trust. And they have lost trust, and for very good reasons. And I think the other thing I want to highlight is you talked about the pastor. And we know, and I've heard this said so many times from the faith-based folk that I am deeply grateful to be connected with in the States, that there's an automatic transmission of trust in the face of a pastor, which is not necessarily a determined religion, but it's a faith-based for anybody. And the folk and veterans seem to respond to it. And perhaps it's even within the kind of mirror neurons of the person, in that there's a gentleness and an ability to hold them at a heart-based level that bridges very quickly. So when we put all these elements, which are probably a little bit in short supply, less people will get to places where they find it very difficult to keep living. So thank you for what you raised.
Just want to say one more thing. Within the therapy space, or like the medical space that I work in, is that I've completely forgotten what I was going to say.
Yeah, I did that the other day, by the way, so it's cool.
Damn it, it's a good one though. Damn it.
Hold it, because what we'll do is we'll go to Andrew.
Can I just get you on?
Yeah,
Can I?
yeah, Beck, go for it. Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Team.
Yeah.
Thank you, T.
I was going to say one thing post Michelle, what she said while you think about what you were going to say, was that, talking to psychologists and doing all the things, right? I think a lot of people, because, you're in pain and you're suffering and whatever, you're wanting someone to fix you and heal you. But no one's going to do that. You have to heal yourself with the support and modalities and all the things available to you that work, right? So that's the hard part for people to find.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know who you are, that's going to be a struggle.
Well, if we acknowledge that vulnerability is an open door into the spirit of a person, and if we abuse that door, we abuse them at the deepest level of themselves. Okay.
So as a representative, I suppose, of the mental health sphere, where people, come for support, one of the biggest things that helps beyond, really getting to know each other is that continuity of that care. Sometimes, again, like it takes you a couple of years before you really find that medical person, really gets to know you and you have the confidence to move forward. But the government really needs to understand that they need to provide our veterans with somebody who can see them for years. And it's not just a few weeks or a few months at a time. You really need to go on a journey together. Yeah.
Well, neuroscience has really proved that 10 sessions maybe doesn't do too much. Anyway, another conversation for another war zone. Andrew, what comes up for you?
Yeah, so my name's Andrew. I work in the veterans chaplaincy space, but I'm also a Navy chaplain, which I do part-time, and I was full-time Navy last century, long time ago. Thank you so much to the panel. There was so many fantastic things that came up. I've just covered my page with notes, and I'm not sure where to begin. But working in the transition space, we know who the people are who are at high risk coming through transition out of the ADF, and they're the people who are involuntarily discharging, is what we say. So it's it's medical, it's people who maybe just have aged out, but they're just not ready to leave. They've been doing this the whole life, but the number says this number and you're out. And also disciplinary, really tricky one. So we kind of know who those high risk people are, and I think we do a reasonable job of wrapping supports around them. Certainly within the ADF, chaplaincy it plays a really important role as those people are moving towards transition. But of course, that disappears the moment they take their uniform off. So we're working really hard in DVA to see whether we can, be much more, continuity there, so that we've got veterans chaplains that can just take over and keep that work going. So we recognise that those high risk times are 1 to 2 years out from discharge, and I think Tim's really hit on it. As people are going through the kind of the transition process, which the ADF puts a lot of energy and resources into, but I think everyone's task focused at that point. So, what's going to be happening with my job? What's happening with education? What's happening with housing for my family? What's happening with, my DVA claims? It's all task, 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 task. And I don't think, as you said, Beck, I don't think people are thinking about themselves and their own health as they go through that process. So it's only afterwards that then sort of comes to the fore. And Tim said, "Oh, I'm fine." I mean, that's exactly right. "Oh, no, I'm fine. No, I'm fine."
Until I'm not, until something breaks.
Exactly. I'm getting all these things done. I'm sorting them. I'm ticking the boxes, right? Because I'm responsible for my family. I'm getting this task done. I'm transitioning, and here's what I'm doing, or setting up the next chapter. But I'm fine. But I'm getting all these things done. And so I think that as people go out the door, probably the system thinks, "Oh, we've done a pretty good job with that. Yeah, we transitioned that person out, and we've ticked all those boxes, and they've ticked their boxes, and they're fine." But they're not fine.
They're not seeing what's on the spreadsheet.
Absolutely. And so, it's only later that those things start to come out. And wouldn't it be great if we were working on them much sooner than later? And how we do that's so important. We talked about pain, that's come up. You talked about physical pain, Ian, but often it's not physical pain. It's pain, and I think that amazing quote, pain that's deeper than words can reach. And so one of the things we're really beginning to wrestle with now is moral injury. And I think that's something which it resonates with everybody who hears it. So veterans hear that term and they know what it means straight away. You don't need to draw them a diagram. But we're still working out exactly what that is. We know it's different to PTSD, but we know often there's overlapping symptoms, and often people have both of those things going on. Not necessarily because they're closely related, but because they both come from the same environment. And if you've been in that environment, you may well have both of these. So we're really working hard on that, because that's the kind of pain that goes to the very deepest part of who we are. And Barry, you mentioned faith. I like to talk about spirituality, and sometimes people think that's a fairly fluffy term. But the reason I talk about spirituality, I talk about spiritual care, is because it's for everybody. It's for all human beings. I think sometimes when we talk about religion, or maybe talk about chaplaincy, people go, "Oh no, I don't need a padre, I'm not religious." And I'm like, well, chaplaincy is not about religion. It's actually about spiritual and pastoral care. And every human being has a human spirit. That's what makes us different to the chairs and the tables and the dogs and the cats. And that's that part of us where we determine our identity and our meaning and our purpose. And you don't have to be a religious person. You just have to be human. That's what's going on there. And I think moral injury forces us to recognize that. And all of the research that's coming out, the evidence forces us to recognize that. You can't pretend that doesn't exist. So it's about holistic care, and we've been talking about that. It's not about just pharmaceutical. It's about biopsychosocial spiritual, BPSS. It's all there. We've got to deal with all of it. And I think the spiritual bit can't be missed. It's about trust. It's about relationship. It's about non-clinical. Clinical's great. My wife's a clinician. I'm all for clinical, but there's also a place for non-clinical. It's interesting, Michelle, you wrote down continuity of care. I thought you'd written down something which I think is pretty important, community of care.
Well, it is.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. So it's about that, getting all of those parts right, because some of those, we overlook to great peril, I think.
Well, Andrew, if we think about a moral injury, the very kind of coarse definition of being a wounding of the soul or the spirit, which it is, because the fundamental betrayal aspect of it, in depending on the situation, is something I believe that only the spiritual, the faith-based can get to, because it's such a deep wounding.
Yeah, guilt and shame. You mentioned ashamed, Michelle. That was really significant that you said that. Yeah, we need to deal with those things, and we can. The good news is, post traumatic growth is that's not an aspiration. That's what we expect in this space, and so we can't leave people in this. And heaven forbid, we can't leave them in it and compensate them. That's immoral.
But the money doesn't put back in what the service took out.
No. And don't leave someone and compensate them for something that we know that we not only can that we can, deal with and that we can actually get that regeneration happening, but we know that where we get to after that is better than where we were before.
Guys, we're going to have to. I think today was really, this beginning was critical because I think we raised some really important issues, and that lays the foundation for what we build on as we have conversations forward. I think we'll tighten up a little bit now, but this was important because everybody raised a critical component that ultimately will allow people to heal. And so thank you for that.